Did they steal our voices in broad daylight? Rip us from ancient ancestral homes? Did we learn to bury words inside our skin, choosing to forget under the din of existence?
Everything you see around you is built off the backs of black and brown bodies.
I think sometimes all we want is to feel like we're part of something, so we laugh along, to fit in, to belong. Inside, pain grows from a whisper to a storm, seeking retribution and reform. But love is endless, a new dawn. Love resolves, and the future is born. There were times I messed up, times I was silent, when I should have said something like, "That's not okay." To laugh along at jokes with punchlines about pakis and galas. They smiled, harmless banter, bro chordo. But how could I let it go? Did I not know? The voice in my head was laughing at myself, at the color of Ma and Baba who crossed oceans to find their children hope. That voice grew louder and stronger every day, fed by the illness in my brain, and it made me do things to myself, to fit in, to belong, to accept and move on. Scars that will always remain beneath the melanin and my pain. Do you see it now? Like a virus, crawling in the minds of oppressors and bullies, in the silence of the apathetic, in the hearts of those who learn to cope by laughing along with the joke till a white knee is pressed down on a black neck. Then cities burn and fires rise and the whole world screams, "I can't breathe."
Forgive and love, forgive and love. Silenced voice of justice, weeping in solitude at might. Have I not seen in what agony reckless youth shatters its life? Have I not seen secret malignance strike down the helpless under the cover of night? Choked is my voice, mute are my songs, darkly my world lies imprisoned in a dream. Choked is my voice, mute are my songs, darkly my world lies imprisoned in a dream. Choked is my voice, mute are my songs, darkly my world lies imprisoned in a dream.
Forgive and
Choked is my voice,
forgive and love.
on my songs, darkly my world lies imprisoned in a dream. Imprisoned in a dream.
Forgive and love. Forgive and love.
Forgive and love. Forgive and love. Imprisoned in a dream.
Forgive and love. Forgive and
Hello and welcome to today's online event in the ongoing series Era of Reclamation. I'm Hartwig Fischer, Director of the British Museum. What we've all just watched is the powerful first episode in the critically acclaimed series Silent Spaces. The series of 6 videos was created during lockdown by award-winning musician, composer, and television presenter Soumik Datta, along with co-creator and filmmaker Souvid Datta, producer Melanie Cura Duball, and a small band of diverse artists, including dancer and choreographer Monique Jonas. This community of artists united to break the silence of some of the UK's most iconic venues forced to close due to the pandemic. In the episode Messengers, this group of performers reclaimed the silent galleries of the British Museum. They created music that reinforces the significance of our shared cultural venues and our need to protect them. Now, with the museum preparing to reopen its doors to the public on Monday, the 17th of May, Bonnie and I are delighted to welcome Soumik, Souvid, Mel and Monique to today's Era of Reclamation conversation, where we will explore the inspirations behind the project and their experience entering the dormant space of the British Museum back in January this year. For those of you who are new to the Era of Reclamation series, it is a project that's inception came about following a conversation between myself and former deputy chair, playwright, novelist, critic, journalist and broadcaster Bonnie Greer. The series explores the idea of reclamation, with our first program launching in January 2020, mere month before the first lockdown. The conversations have aimed to open up the past in all its complexity, to face and define the present, and to work towards a future that is cross-generational, multidisciplinary, multi-educational, and with active community involvement. And so it gives me great pleasure now to welcome Bonnie and welcome our esteemed guests. Bonnie, over to you.
Thank you, Hartwig. Good evening, everyone. And just to add to what Hartwig has said, or not to add to it, I will sort of riff it, is one of the things that we wanted to do when we decided to have these conversations as part of our investigation into making this curation called the Era of Reclamation is that we wanted to really hear from artists. My background is the theater. Hartwig is an esteemed art critic, curator, works with artists. So we wanted to go to that space, I think, where art works and where it lives. And I can't think of a better way to do that than with the guests that we have tonight. So this is going to be a little different in the sense that we're just going to go step into the art space, the music space, the dance space. I have no idea what's going to come out of this. As you see, I'm going in my Southside Chicago accent because I'm really, really happy about this evening. And we're going to see what's going to happen out of this. And I want to say to the audience, especially, that please, when it's time, when we open up, please say what you need to say, express what you need to express. This is your space. This is your museum. And we're going to do that here. In a couple of days, a week or so, it will be the first anniversary of the police murder of George Perry Floyd Jr. And I'm from the Midwest, and Mr. Floyd died there. And I still can't really get myself around a lot of what happened. It took me a long time to see the video, a long time, because my ancestors are from the South, and I grew up in a sort of dynasty of lynching and Black men being lynched. So I couldn't watch that for a long time. I think we don't know yet, and I think it's going to take a long time with the combination of this pandemic, which is the worst that has happened in 100 years, and this murder. And it has undone all of us. It has undone our institutions. It has undone our art, our lives, our bodies, our love, our minds. I'm at ground zero personally. And I'm saying that from somebody who worked with Fred Hampton when I was younger. I've gone through it all, and I'm like at ground zero with this. And what really struck me, and Hartwig and I talk like maybe once a week about all kinds of things, and we did come up with the idea of reclaim as what is going to be coming. And we came up with that idea in 2019. So it's like, you know, we're very prescient about that because that's a big theme now. I want to talk about reclaiming. I want to talk to these largely artists of color about reclaiming. I want to talk about what got them to this place to be able to do that, if it happened at all. I want to talk about contested spaces. I want to talk about majority spaces and being artists of color in majority spaces. I want to talk about everything. So let's start. Soumik, I have to ask you this, and I've said this to you, and please, everybody weigh into this. What knocked me out, and still does, is the courage of all of you, the bravery, the beauty of you all to make a film where you, Soumik, walk right through the fire. And you do that at the top of this thing. It's a brave, great act of art, but it's also a very brave act of power and defiance. And I want to talk to all of you because all of you did it. Soumik was the person who, how'd you walk through those voices? Because that's what you did, and that's what struck me. You walk through the voices.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Anybody can start when they want to.
You know, the funny thing is that in the video, when people watch the video, they see me walking through the building. But in reality, I wasn't alone. I was with all of these guys here. They're my collaborators, they're my partners, my family, my team, and I didn't have to do it alone. So the bravery was shared, definitely. It was an incredible experience, which still gives me goosebumps even now. And to be here, to be invited to do this with you, Hartwig, with you, Bonnie, and with this amazing, amazing creative team, it means a lot. So thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I also just think it's incredibly brave of the British Museum to open up its doors to us and give us the space.
Oh, stop, Melanie. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let me stop you. Let me stop you.
Let me
Let me
explain.
stop you. Okay, because I'm gonna come on that. Okay, go.
I do think that all of us are very aware that certain conversations need to be held at the moment. We need to talk about certain things, and we need to talk about the role of art when we address certain things, and whether that be racism, colonialism, the legacy of what it means to be British. And we just thought, what better place to talk about these things and to knock on someone's door than the British Museum. And the British Museum opened its doors to us, and it invited an incredibly diverse cast to perform this song, which of course is a statement, both on both of, I think, of the side of us as artists and creatives, and as well on the side of the institution. So I do think that we're all incredibly grateful to have had the opportunity to start a conversation that really needs to be held. So,
Let me jump back, because there's a reason why I jumped in there. Like Hartwig said, I've been deputy chair of the museum and on the board, therefore. This museum didn't open the door to you. It was never closed. And this is what I'm knocked out about by the beauty of what all of you did. This museum is never closed. So that's interesting to me that you said this, because maybe we need to go there for, I mean, that was beautiful. And maybe we need to go there because for me, they call it the artistic gesture of coming through that portal, which is what you said, Soumik, you brought everybody, Souvid, you brought everybody, Monique, you brought everybody, and you say it in your meditation as you come through. You talk about Baba, you talk about all these things, you come through, you come through, you come through, you come through to a door that is not closed. So let's talk about perception, because that's what's interesting too. And I think only artists can actually break that veil. Does anybody want to go there?
I mean, I feel like Monique had a lot to say about that when we had conversations at the British Museum, in terms of, yeah, how did it feel for you to walk in there? Have you always had the feeling that the door was open, and if so, why?
Yeah, I think perception is a really good word to use in this space. I think the way that I framed it and how I try to frame my craft and my art as I walk in is to walk in a space without external limitations. So I'm aware that to many, some of the artifacts and things that are present in the British Museum may strike a chord.
Go there, Monique, because you're a dancer.
Yes.
And so your communication is nonverbal largely, although I know lots of dancers who talk, but generally dance happens in the body. Your reaction or your feeling as a choreographer, as a creator of dance, how did you do that? What did you do?
So for me, what I was saying is this notion of I create from the inside out as opposed from the outside in. So whichever space I'm stepping into, I'm aware of either its perception, how it's perceived by others, how it is received by others, and how it may give or not to other people, and how that may affect people. But the core of what I create starts within for me. And in this project, I was co-choreographing with Isan Demania, who's the other dancer featured in this video. And we had a lot of discussions, but for us, the driving point was the music. We spent some time individually with the track that Soumik had sent us, which is the one that we just heard and saw the visual to. We spent some time separately to see what our initial responses were to it. How did the music make us feel? We listened to the lyrics. We found lines that had particular imagery that either stuck out to us or resonated with us, or whether that was clear to us or not. And then we came together in the studio and we had that discussion. Sometimes it was verbal, sometimes it was just physical, allowing the bodies to talk for us and build that movement language. And then we were able to, both Isan and I, have a meeting with Mel, Soumik and Souvid to kind of understand their vision for the journey of this visual that we've got, and see how we can marry the ideas that Isan and I had movement-wise, and see how we can bring that into the vision and merge our voice into that space.
What were they? What were your ideas?
Before
you met, because again, I want to stress to the audience, this is a conversation with artists, and I'm really, really desperate to get to the moment of it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not easy to explain what moves an artistic moment, what makes a note happen, what makes a gesture happen. When you do something like this and you're coming through a building, how do you get to that point? What made you do this as opposed to do this? That's where I want to go with you as a choreographer and a dancer. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So for me personally, music is a large driving point. It's quite a big starting point, because I'm someone who believes that I have a lot of rhythm running through me. And so when I hear the different rhythms and elements, I allow that to kind of transcend through my body, and we create this movement language, is how we refer to it as dancers, that comes out. So I respond to imagery. There were some lines in the song, such as, choked is my voice, or imprisoned in a dream.
What about around you? What about around you? Did you go in? Did you go into the galleries?
We didn't go into the gallery until the day before we filmed.
What happened when you went in? What happened when you went in?
So I think what I find is that the music was the starting point for us, for me, from a movement perspective, because what we're adding is an additional layer, an additional texture to the visual through our movement and to the space. So this space didn't come first in the creative process.
But what happened in the space? That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, what happened in the space is we looked at the movement that Isan and I had created. I was thinking from a visual perspective of how our movement looks in certain spaces. We left some choreographic things open so that we could create it in this space. So there are 2 phrases that we did on 2 separate staircases within the building. And Isan and I created that whilst we were in the actual venue, and using some of the movement language that we'd already established in the studio prior to that. And it was just a case of finding a way for our movement to fill the space, not necessarily add or detract. It was just to be present in the space, be fully present within the space with the movement that we were coming in with.
And the movement that you chose, because I'm desperate to get, I'm desperate to get to, with all of you, everything that you do is a choice. You decided this is gonna work, or this not, I don't even wanna use the word work because it's horrible. This will be it, and that will be it, or that will be it. And as a choreographer, as a dancer, you chose certain movements. You chose them. Either, and I was struck by them. I was struck by the fleeing through. I was struck by the fleeing at the end, the choice of that. And I know that's the director's choice, but also the fleeing through, the rolling down, all of this. How were those movements chosen? Because they all have symbolic meaning within the context of our ancestry and also the museum. How were they chosen?
Yeah, so the rolling down the stairs in particular was something that we created the day before we started filming. From a movement perspective, we're seeing ourselves an additional element within the space. So we're seeing how we can fill this space. We wanted to just go down the stairs in a way that wasn't just walking, which wasn't the typical way. We wanted to get closer to the ground. We wanted to kind of fall into the patterns of the steps as it was going, to build a flow so that by the time we started low and we came up in height, and also in fullness and in movement, by the time we reached the bottom of the stairs, where I believe in the journey of the film, we met the other artists and we started to work slightly bigger in terms of our movement. So visually, we're starting smaller, carving out the shape of the space with our body, allowing our bodies to roll down the space. And as we're going, we have falling motifs, we have dynamic motifs that bring us together. We were rehearsing to the line that said "choked is my voice," and so we had specific arm movements.
Then you're rolling down the stairs. Then you're rolling, and then you're rolling down the stairs, which is beautiful and strong.
Could I come in with a question? What I find very impressive is the complexity of this short film. It's, you know, Soumik, you walk in through the voices, through the gate, into the space. And of course that is very physical and at the same time is metaphorical. There is your own presence as a musician and as the person who talks, and also almost as a dancer. You dance through that space, you walk through that space. You walk past the bust of Hans Sloane. And at one point there is a short sequence where you're running along the rotund in the Great Court, looking back, and it's almost like being persecuted.
Pursued.
And yeah, pursued. And all these elements come together with the music and with the singing and the text of the singing, which seeks a kind of, how shall I put it, redemption. And I'm struck, I've seen this film several times, and I always see a new film when I see it, because it's so incredibly rich. It has so many layers of poetry, of voice, of movement, of taking possession of the space. And I very much like what Monique said about just being in the space and being present and marking your own presence with your own movements, not necessarily in response to what is there, but obviously there is then a relationship. And I would like to hear a little more about how you created that complexity.
Well, Hartwig, thank you so much. It's great to hear you say that, and it means a lot for us to all sort of get that feedback from you, from the museum. I think for that question, really, this is the joy of a collaborative effort, that I'm responsible for certain creative measures. Monique is responsible for other ones. And I think at the end of the day, it's the job of the director to pull all those strands together and create that complexity, which is articulate and in a way that works on film. So I think I'll let Souvid take this one.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. And thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Hartwig, for such insightful and encouraging feedback. And I think it feels like you saw what a lot of us put time and effort and our souls into creating, and it resonates. So that's really great to hear. I think in terms of the complexity, I think it was always going to be complex, to be honest. For me, walking into that space, you immediately feel a sense of tension and conflict between, especially in this pandemic where you are the only people in there and someone has let you in there, and it's to some extent a canvas for you to draw on. I felt a kind of tension between incredible empowerment and incredible intimidation, because on the one hand you have really the emblem of history in the UK, and with it a kind of statement on what is valuable, a statement on what we collectively acknowledge as our shared narrative, and at the same time a space which in some ways and in sometimes has a kind of neglected, exploited, marginalized ethnic minority kind of opinions, histories, and so on. So that was a lot of, I guess that led to the intimidation side of things. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you have an incredible opportunity because as storytellers, as creatives, and this leads maybe to a wider discussion about what we were thinking about as creatives during the pandemic, but I felt like our art needs to reflect our experiences, and we need to represent something. As storytellers, if we don't represent, then we're not really doing our job. And getting a chance to bring our experiences, our narratives, our feelings, our aspirations, our struggles, our pain into that space and express that in the way which all of these amazing artists know best, which is through their art and through like the purest expression of their souls, really. That was really what was battling inside my head. And I felt like the answer to that in some ways was, we were lucky really, because Soumik and I, we grew up in an incredible, very creative, very supportive, very eccentric household in some ways. We're from a Bengali family, and we grew up around a style of music, a school of music called Rabindra Sangeet, inspired by, well, created by Rabindranath Tagore, who's a prolific writer, a polymath, a poet, an activist, and so on. And this song, the lyrics, which Soumik can speak to more, were adapted from his works. And the message, the chorus, which repeats so often, forgive and love, for me was a kind of driving factor to keep coming back to. I think we had to acknowledge the history, because I don't think we should shy away from that in any way. It's our history, we can't change it. The only thing we can do is talk about it transparently, learn from it, and try and build on that. But forgive and love for me was a really important message, especially in this year and this time, where I feel a key emotion that all of us need to tap into more is empathy. And history often has a kind of quite brutal gaze on things, and it's very important that we are holding people and institutions and chapters in our history to account now, in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to do before. But at the same time, I think in order to make a constructive step forward after having done that, after having acknowledged the truth, after having expressed anger, is actually empathy. And that was a struggle for all of us, I think. And it's I mean, Soumik has said this before, and I think that resonated with me, that forgive and love, although in the original poem is just a statement, I think for us it became a question, and almost like a quite radical step to take at this moment, where you are entering a contentious space, you are entering into a contentious conversation where there is anger around, and legitimate anger. But I think for me at least, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I felt like in order for that conversation to become more productive, what we need to inject is a sense of empathy and forgiveness and love and understanding, and do so in the most pure way possible, which doesn't shy away from hard truths, but also acknowledges our shared humanity and how we need to move towards progress instead of expecting something to just be perfect. I think that's what maybe led to the several layers of complexity in the video. And I think I was really inspired by Soumik's response to well, the very tragic killing of George Floyd, and at the time he wrote a poem, which maybe he can talk to us more about, which was really the embryo of this whole video, the idea behind it all, several months ago in the lockdown, and that sparked certain discussions about how we as South Asians and Indians who have our own colonial history and have encounters with oppression and exploitation and marginalization also harbor a deep sense of, well, quite an embedded problem of anti-Blackness, which we needed to look at in ourselves. And I think that attitude of being willing to criticize yourself, but also look at yourself and others with love, was really important for me in my approach to this artistically.
Sometimes I feel, thank you for that. Sometimes I feel we are condemned to being articulate, if that makes any sense, because to a certain extent, in order for certain doors to open, for certain things to happen, we have to become articulate. And we have to become articulate in a language that narrows down what we feel, what we see, what we do. And I've spent a lot of I think this may sound contradictory, but in this curation with Hartwig, I've really worked on becoming less articulate, because we are condemned to articulacy. And I'm saying that as artists of color, we have to be articulate. And sometimes there are things you cannot be articulate about. You should not be articulate about. I think in a way for me, to not be able to see the video of the murder of George Floyd was my acknowledgement that I could not make that articulate. And I was almost outraged by people who could make it articulate. And I think, again, to go back and, in my sort of pushing way, is that all of us have made ourselves articulate, all of us. And that there is a moment in creation, in the making of something, where you are not. And that is the true moment that I want, we are getting there, and I feel it, all of us. And I think this pandemic has given us moments of being inarticulate and not to be afraid of those moments. The film for me, the music, the choreography, the lyrics, the coming through the portal of the museum, all of that for me is a kind of supreme articulacy that I think people desperately need to engage with, because sometimes we can talk too much. We can say things that are not really the thing.
That's
and when
right.
what sticks out of my head, Soumik, is Baba. When you said, you muttered it when you, in one of the moments coming through, you said, Baba. I heard it jumped out of like that. And I was thinking, what is this artist? What's happening at this moment? What's happening at this moment?
There was a lot happening at that moment. a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Sometimes silence is best. And in many ways, this whole series is called Silent Spaces. And it's not just about buildings and venues and concert halls and museums that was silent during this time. It was also about us sometimes not finding the words to express what we want to say and being silent and not shying away from that and celebrating that. Exactly what you're saying. I think there's a lot of power in silence, and we're learning that as a people, as a global community, in the power of meditation, the power of observing, not always speaking, listening, taking in, and I think it was exactly a year ago. We're coming up to the date now, and when I saw it on the TV, I didn't know how to deal with it. And this poem was one way in which I was trying to deal with it. It reminded me of an event that had happened while I was at school, and I'd been bullied, and someone had, it was a very similar kind of knee on neck kind of situation. It took me back there. It opened a memory that I'd forgotten. And I was able to write this piece. And even at the end of writing that piece, when I thought that, okay, now I feel like I've articulated what I was feeling, I was dissatisfied, because of course it didn't. And so it's exactly what you're saying. This need to articulate trauma, this need to articulate DNA pain, it is something that we sometimes don't have the language to do. And that's why we write songs. That's why we dance. That's why we do all these things. And sometimes in order to get to that articulate place, it's about stacking and layering all these different disciplines on top of each other, weaving through each other, allowing Monique to respond to these words and the beat, allowing Souvid to turn the camera at a certain point, which is something that I can't do through my music. He can do it through film and through the camera. Monique can roll down the stairs. I can't do that through the music. But I can stand there, you know, and talk about Ma and Baba and their journey, which is only a feeling that I have. I don't have the words to express it. I never will.
Yeah.
You said that so beautifully, and I can just add, looking at all of you performing together and coming together and having these different experiences in the different galleries. In one gallery, it was a sense of heaviness, and another, a moment to really think, and in another, you experience love, and you talked about love and forgiveness and what it means to all of you. And it was just so interesting to see that, of course, everyone has a different history, a different narrative, a different trauma that they might have brought to the place, and how you allowed everyone to respond to that in their own language was just incredibly beautiful. Everyone speaks a different language in this performance. The language of dance, or the language of vocals and words, or the saxophone. It was just incredibly beautiful to see that come together. And what also really struck me when Soumik and I had a conversation about, can you actually just tell people to forgive and love? Isn't that what we're doing here? Is that he said, I never tell anyone what to think or what to do. And I can't tell other people to care about certain things either. All that I can do with my art is to show that I care. And hopefully that will bring people to a place where they feel like they want to engage with topics that maybe they didn't know how to, maybe they were overwhelmed by, I mean, it is heavy, right? So
Melanie, how did you enter? How did you enter?
I entered as a German. And
how did you do it? Tell us, please.
It's difficult because I come from a place where we have a difficult history ourselves in Germany that we need to grapple with. So I come from a country where it's not about learning to forgive, it's about learning to apologize and doing it over and over and over again. And then coming into a space which holds so much history, that is trying to reinvent itself, that is trying to find out how to marry different narratives.
Melanie, for a second, please. Can I take you back a minute? It's really important, something you just said. This is so powerful, what you just said. Can I just take you back there? I want to talk about apology. I want to understand that, because partly can't put into words. Partly and not just the British Museum, all museums, all of them are in that space as well, in a sense. And you as an artist, as a creative, I am absolutely, totally moved and stunned that you were able to name it. So can you go back into apology, if I'm making sense to you? Because I think that is a really strong space that you're talking about, where your work and your art and everything comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot about confronting yourself with that feeling of guilt and trying to understand where it comes from, and also just really trying to understand your role in everything that is still happening in the world. I mean, in Germany, we often apologize for the past and we forget to really think about what is happening in the present. And I mean, I've grown up in a half German, half Argentinian household, but you like to tell yourself that because you have a mixed background somehow, that you're not part of a problem of systemic racism that is still everywhere. But of course you are. If you're not aware of it, if you're not taking a stance, if you not choose your words very wisely, and if you're not aware of that still being a problem that needs to be addressed, then you are part of the problem. And so for me, it was really a moment of coming in, being overwhelmed by how majestic this place is, and feeling intimidated in many ways, being surrounded by these artists, this diverse cast, which has decided to come together and put out a message of forgiving and loving. And that sparked conversation amongst us as well. How many people think of themselves as being really woke, but they're not aware of what they often contribute to things that are wrong. And it was just beautiful to see how this piece of art is addressing all of that and how we're bringing all of these issues together.
Can I ask you all, Melanie, thank you for that very, very much. Can I ask you all how much you think this sense of apology is driving a lot of what's going on now? And I'm going to tag apology onto cleansing. Because for me, I don't see how anybody can apologize for anything. How can you? What does it mean? I don't know what reparation means. How can you repair what happened to my ancestors? It's not possible, or to any of ours. So when we go to these kinds of words, do you think that a lot of what's being driven, I'm saying this to you as artists, all of you as creatives, do you think of a lot of all that's being driven, the undercurrent is a kind of release, cleansing? Maybe I'll be off the hook, maybe I'll be okay, maybe this will be, you know, I'll sort out whatever, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing? As opposed to moving forward, making this creative act, and not looking back.
Well, isn't there, if I may add this question, the simple question, also the notion of acknowledgement, that, you know, is you say something. And Soumik, you talked about trauma and finding a way out of trauma through silence, but also through articulating. And I think, you know, this way out as a way to transcend, in that film, you give us those moments brought together. You have the silence, you walk silently through the voices of exasperation, pain, and despair.
Yes.
You speak in the film,
Yes.
and it's like a poem that articulates an incredibly complex set of emotions, experiences, thoughts. You hear the music, and I think love and forgive are not imperatives, they're indicatives. And we see you, in a way, physically engage with that space in which you make resonate altogether those words, your presence. And I think that's part of the power of this film, that all these moments come together, and they don't efface each other. They strengthen each other. And if I may add that, because I'm a museum person, there are the objects. Because in the film, I think the way you introduced some of the objects is wonderfully subtle. It's very, you know, it's not fleeting almost. But here's a head, here's a shoulder, here's a bust, here's a vase. Monique, you dance through a space of bas reliefs, which have some of the most violent scenes on them that you find in the museum.
Yes.
And I think all this is present. But the thing that you've created as such is an offer to transcend, whilst not, you know, while all this experience and all the pain rests present. And I think that's an incredibly strong and beautiful achievement.
Yes.
Thank you, Hartwig. Thank you. That's I think you've articulated it the best. But I think that's what art can do. You know, Bonnie, you were talking about, you know, let's talk about art. I think the difference between art and anything else is that out there, everything else is an exclamation mark, and art can be a question mark. And if we're talking about forgiveness, it's about, can we forgive? Can we love? What's the burden of forgiveness? What's the cost of love? Can we apologize? What's the cost of apologizing? And actually, if we can for a moment go back to the original poem by Rabindranath Tagore, the poem itself is called Proshno, which in Bengali means question. And in many ways, it's the DNA of this whole project, you know, certainly of this episode, that sometimes in order to address very difficult, very complicated, historical, traumatic things, you have to ask a question instead of demanding answers. And I think that's the beauty of Tagore, that he you know could do that. And I'm very lucky, you know, both Souvid and I are from that tradition. He's the sort of he's our Bible in many ways, a sort of Shakespeare to our community. And the whole poem Proshno is a series of questions. You know, have I not seen the silent voice of justice weeping in solitude at might? I didn't have to do anything with that. The line for the song came straight out of that. The other lines as well. There's so much grace and power and beauty and softness in a request, as opposed to always, you know, kind of demanding the world of people. And I think, you know, that was there was also, there could have been a world when where this wouldn't have worked, you know. We had the right team, we had the right collaborators. Monique responded in such a beautiful way. Both Monique and Isan, Yasmin on saxophone, you know, Amala on vocals. It sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it just comes together, and that's the beauty of it, as you know.
If I can add to that for a second, just maybe tying it also back to, Bonnie, what you were mentioning about the idea of apologizing or moving on. I think this year has seen there's been a lot of awareness and a lot of attention, overdue attention given to a lack of equality and a clear social injustice towards primarily Black people in the world and people of minority ethnic backgrounds who have been oppressed. And to some extent, there has been a lot of performative apologizing in the world. And that was something that really I was conscious of when we approached this project. And what made it make sense to me was the fact that everyone in this film had a very personal approach. And although we were in a space that us being in that space was inherently political, and therefore it would maybe be interpreted in a political context when the film came out. When we were actually in there, and what we wanted to do while we were in there was all very personal. And Soumik's response came from, yes, watching the George Floyd video, yes, coming to terms with his background as a South Asian, yes, coming to terms with instances in his past, and seeing them in a clearer light, and the fact that the song took on a very subjective and personal and intimate response to these very important worldwide global political movements was what made it make sense to me. And in that way, I think this film is an example really of what Soumik said. It's what an artist can do, where we're coming to a time where, at least I've been struggling with this a lot. I studied politics, I studied international law and conflict and all these things, and now I'm trying to make films, and I bounce around with whether art should be a form of activism or not. And I often think it should, but I think in this case, it makes most sense because it comes from a place that is really honest and true. And there is a personal story there, which will hopefully resonate with other people. But I don't think our objective when this opportunity was presented to us was we need to make a political statement. I think in some ways it chimes in with what Monique said, that choreography comes from within as opposed to reacting to external factors. And I think that was really important in terms of our approach to this project.
Yeah. There's a multiple consciousness there, isn't it? That not just a double one, but all of us are entering the space with different consciousness, and it's a sort of symbolic for the wider immigrant experience of having to every day do the crazy acrobatics of just crossing the road,
articulating.
Yeah.
Which you do at the beginning, Soumik. You cross the road, literally.
Across the road, yeah, exactly. Let alone, come into a space like the British Museum. I mean, the daily acrobatics of just language and culture and duality and having different homes. I think this is not a film that would have happened without everybody in it. making it their own journey through the museum.
Yeah, but in a way, you know, dialogue means you have a space, a gap, which you bridge through the word.
Absolutely.
And the way you do this is through translation, in a way, you know, which respects the otherness of the other, the irreducible otherness of the other, and yet enters into that space of togetherness and exchange. And, you know, seeing Monique move through the space as who she is, that one and unique person, and you know, making herself present in relation to what is there, you know, that is, I think at the same time, it for me, it shows something that I would hope happens in that space, and you show us what that is, in a way. There is that visceral, vital relationship and an exchange, which, you know, which to see it like this on the screen, once removed, so to say, suddenly becomes much closer and becomes a much more intense experience.
You know, this reminds me of the question that I asked Monique at the museum. And I asked you, are you making a statement with being part of this? And I remember that you said something about the statement that you would want to make. And you also said, but you know, Mel, in a way, it wouldn't even matter because of the way that I am perceived by society and the way that this cast is perceived by society. This will translate into a statement in and of itself. And I was just wondering if you could tell us more about that. That was really interesting.
Yeah, so I've had a couple thoughts listening to other people, what you guys have been saying so far. I think a key thread that is running through my mind at the moment is, as artists, our essence runs through what we create. So in everything I do, a part of my essence is there, and my medium that I express that is through my physicality and my dancing, and sometimes choreographically. And I think no matter what your medium is, whether it's film or whether if you're doing producing or you're working in journalism, or if you're creating music and writing songs, the essence of who you are as an artist and your voice and your experiences runs through what you create. And so that was the core of what I was saying when I said it started internally, and I worked internally to establish that essence, to see how I'm bringing that essence into the other creative ideas of the other collaborators around. So when I went into the space, I am not allowing external forces to define who I am, because I'm aware that my very existence of being both Black and female means that I carry certain stereotypes that are projected onto me externally by other people. And so as an artist, in order to connect to what feels like my truth, or what feels very honest and real for me in each space, within each project, with each of the collaborators, I'm aware of the external perceptions, the way that you can be received by other parties. But that is something that is just an awareness, as opposed to something that is directly influencing what the artistic voice, or what my artistic voice is saying. So when I said, I don't think it matters if I'm intentionally making a statement, how it's received by others will be perceived to be making a statement due to the history of what's present in the museum, how I am perceived as a Black female within society, and just merging those two factors together in one space. But what's really beautiful about art, there's two things I'm thinking of. As artists, when you create it and you be as truthful as you can be in your creation, and then you have to let it go so that it can be received by other people around you. You can't control how it's going to be received. So knowing that, me being in this space, I can't control how that's going to be received. I can only approach the project with as much authenticity and honesty as I can, and carry my creative essence through my involvement with the project. And the other thing that I was also thinking from some of the earlier points that were made, this notion of articulation. Some people have said, you know, where words fail, that's where dance steps in. You know, I see us with the voiceless communicators, wordless communicators, so to speak, because we use our physicality. But it's a universal language that people understand, which I think is very beautiful, because I don't think all of our feelings need to be articulated to each minute detail. Feelings are there to be felt, and that's where art can step in, because art is a really strong tool to encourage others to evoke and offer out what we're feeling to other parties so it can be received, and they can receive some of that emotion, some of that feeling where words fail. And so I think in this particular video, the perspective through which I believe it was approached seems quite human. You get to see our essences throughout. So we're speaking through our medium that we express that might not necessarily just be vocally via conversation. For me, it's through movement, or it's through, you know, the music composition, or, you know, all the different aspects of that. It's encouraging people to tap into the world, or the essence of the artist's voices that are present in those spaces. Yeah.
You know, you have said, before we open to questions, you made me all remember my brother's telephone call to me when we saw the demonstrations after the murder of George Floyd. As I said, my brother used to be in the Black Panther Party in Chicago, and we both knew Fred Hampton. And I worked with Fred Hampton, and my brother knew him very well. And my brother calls me up from Chicago, and he said, Bonnie, this is exactly like, and he was panicking. He said, Bonnie, they are doing exactly what we did in 1968. They're doing exactly the same thing, the same marches, the same everything. He was panicking. And I said, I know, you know, and we can't say anything about this because this is their thing, their generation, and they've got to go through this. I know they're doing the same things over again. So what do we do as we're standing, you know, being a part of it, but also looking, and when our youth, we went through this as teenagers in the streets in '68 and burning the cities and protesting all of this. And now as I listen to all of you, and I'm thinking of something the poet Rimbaud said, that it's necessary to be absolutely modern. And what is so incredible, and you've answered my question for me, and why I played this film over and over and over, is because this film is absolutely modern, in that what you've done is you've taken on the past and you've acknowledged it, you understand it, and you move through it to something new. And you dare to do that, all of you. And I think that's what art does, is the news that stays new, as some poets said. And I think that it will answer the demand for the next level of this, about, you know, where do we go? What do we do? And it is about going to that space. And I don't want to put any words to it, but it is about going to a space where we haven't been before. And I want to just say one last thing before we open to questions, that opening shot, and all of you, the movement through the gallery, the way you stand, the music, the way you look, the way the film captures the angles, all of this is one of questing and of questioning. And I think that for me is the most powerful thing. And I think every moment of it is incredible. Do we have anybody? Does anyone want to, any questions out there, or should we keep talking? No?
Well, here's one question.
Right.
Was it very different for you to work in those different spaces? Is there a specificity to working in these different spaces? that you explored?
Souvid chose them for us, so.
Say again?
I said Souvid chose them for us, so he should probably take that question.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, I think everyone must have had their own thoughts and experiences entering these quite different spaces. For me, as much as what was driving this project was personal, I think it was very much at the top of my head to make sure that we were responding to this incredible space and the sense of history around it. We shot in, if I'm not wrong, I need to correct me if I'm wrong, rather, but Gallery 18, where you have, it's the Parthenon Gallery, which has a history of its own, which is contentious and relates to aspects of British colonialism. And we wanted to not shy away from that and shoot in front of it. And there is an element of the video where a brilliant singer in the video, Amala, from South London, a beautiful soul singer, is singing words of which acknowledge the pain that comes from a history where marginalized voices have been exploited and oppressed and kind of looted from, and so on. And at the same time, you see the dancers rolling down the steps and beginning to build themselves back up, running away, being persecuted by the sense of history, by being pursued by the sense of history, which for so long has oppressed people who have been marginalized by largely white, Caucasian, European, Western forces. But at the same time, realizing that now we are here, and we are here to make our mark and say our piece and make sure that we are part of this story. And I wanted to make sure that in each space that we enter, there is an element of that. We had access to, again, if I'm not wrong, I might be naming these spaces wrong, but the Egyptian gallery, the Enlightenment gallery, and I think it was important for us to, it was interesting for me to bring Soumik's piece to camera, his poem, his kind of spoken word response to all of this, into the Enlightenment gallery, because it's a space where it's about knowledge, and it's about who contributes to knowledge. It's about who, what voices are incorporated into our sense of what is important, really, and what is real. And you see Monique and Hassan often shot from a lower angle, seeing them as quite large figures within the space, juxtaposed against statues of Zeus and Hercules, who are these mythical figures who are, as far as we know, all white. And I think this was very much about making sure that we are part of, I say we as a kind of weird collective broad brush, but just marginalized voices are part of what the British Museum is trying to do.
What do you think that is?
What do I think that is?
No, seriously. I mean, because all of you, I mean, that's very important for Hartwig and I in this work that we're building. And we're going to ask you to come back again, all of you, please, because we need to carry this on. So this is part one. But what do you think that is? Because this is an honest question, because we are working on this. So what do you think the mission is, or what do you think it is, or should be?
I mean, I can respond from a very personal level, and I definitely don't.
Please do.
I mean, I think that the role of an institution which is as widely known and respected as the British Museum should be to unflinchingly identify, highlight, and share, I guess, our history in a way that sure, is interesting, is entertaining, can bring up weird, quirky stories from our past which we aren't aware of. But I think it should empower us. I think a museum's role is to make us feel informed, to give us a sense of understanding of our place in history, in order that we can better understand our place now and figure out where to go in the future. And allowing us in our very, very small way to come in and make a contribution to that was really meaningful to me, because I mean, I've never seen something like this before, especially in this space in the UK. There are instances of it happening now across the world, which is amazing. But yeah, I think the British Museum, in a lot of ways, is the gatekeeper of what our collective history is and our collective identity is, and what is valuable enough to acknowledge as a significant contributor to our identity. And with that in mind, it comes back to storytelling, really, about if we're not representing, then we're failing.
I don't know how to thank you really for that, Souvid. It's the most profound definition of, I think, the mission of such a place, of that place. And I can't tell you how profoundly glad I am that you did walk through that door and you came in, all of you. And for me, you know, this is a vital contribution. You're now part of that space through the work you've done, but also to what it reveals about that space. You know, that space of history, memory, violence, creation, remembrance, and pure inspiration. And, you know, the 7 minutes, in a way, contain it all. So,
yes, you do.
We have one question here about how can museums and galleries work with artists to further these conversations and allow people to grow and to heal? And we could perhaps also add, you know, joyfully and confidently assume responsibility for the future when they walk through that door in the other direction, out into the world again, you know, carrying that experience of the museum with them. So I really have to thank you in the name of everybody working in that museum. You know, you've created something that is a vital contribution to what this space is meant to be, I think.
Thank you for saying that. And in turn, I think we definitely, two people we need to acknowledge are Christina Tubb and Freddie Matthews, who work at the museum and who have been going back and forth with us for many months over getting us access to the museum, giving us a few days to enter, supporting late night shoots that went past when we were supposed to be kicked out of the museum. And they've been incredible. So we're really glad that we got the opportunity, I think, to engage in this conversation, which I think is clearly one that's ongoing and going to grow. And in our small way, through amazing work from this team, really have a little but hopefully meaningful contribution to all of that.
We have, I think, a few minutes left, and I want to say and echo Hartwig as well. I thank you for being able to allow me to articulate some things that I've not been able to say. I've not been able, believe it or not, to find the words to say. Sometimes you use a lot of words, but they don't actually say the thing that you want to say because you can't say it. And thank you for allowing me to speak, say these things. We would like you to come back, please, and talk to us again, because I think I see Hartwig's face smiling, so I know that, you know, you've opened a big door for us in this work. Can I ask you each for 20 seconds of telling me what you have reclaimed in working in this space, on this work? What do you think?
Okay, I'll go first then.
I knew you would.
I think personally I reclaimed a sense of self during this pandemic, and yeah, just an incredible opportunity to ask other people questions that I think I would not have asked them had we not performed in this space. So yeah, that is for me.
Anyone else? Do you know yet? I mean, because it might be too soon to know.
I think perhaps it's more about, you know, what other people didn't reclaim, and us, you know, the experience that we had. I think it's quite unique. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, Hartwig, Bonnie, but certainly there has been no other lockdown like this, and no other colored artists have walked through the doors to make something together. And I feel like for all the thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who love the British Museum and have been there, and who have not had that experience, I would love for them to see this, and for them to, well, through the video in some ways, have that experience, have the access that we had. I think, you know, Souvid was right that through Freddie and Christina, we were very lucky to have the access, which we then shared with our collaborators. We wanted to bring in as many people as we could, you know, but I would love, for now, people all over the world who love the museum to have that access, and let the video be a ticket for them to enter, if possible, if that's okay with you.
I know he's not going to say no now.
He never says no. And so, Souvid, anyone else?
Just to quickly bounce off that point and relate it back to something Soumik said earlier, that this was really a team project, and for us, so many of these conversations happened in the 20-minute lunch break we had in the Great Court, in the few seconds of silence where we got to stop processing the act of being in that space. And there is an amazing documentary which Melanie has directed, which kind of brings in some of the voices from other people during our time there, which I thought maybe we could end on, or at least open up to the audience, and hopefully it can be a gateway to exploring some of the other films that have been made in this project, which were shot across the UK, again, in similar in kind of environments, looking at cultural institutions that have been closed down during the lockdown, and engaging with them through a lens which is both personal and socially aware. I thought it would be lovely to hear from the people who aren't present today. So Isan, Amala, Monique is in this video as well, and yeah.
Do we have See, I'm in the theater, you see. So do we have, and you're all musicians, so do we have our space? Can we do it and do it in justice in the time we have now? Can we do it?
I think we can.
Okay, let's do it.
Should we end with this?
Yes.
And just before we see the film, Monique, I don't know if you want to come in, and because we haven't heard you yet on reacting to Bonnie's question.
Reclaiming.
Yes, I think this project was less about reclaiming for me, because I feel like reclaiming would be implying that something was lost in the first place. So I think instead of reclaiming and being able to move it through different spaces in this project, it was more about owning the space that you're in, owning my essence, no matter what the location I was in. So whether we were in spaces that were specific, or rooms or galleries that were tied specifically to harder, more harsher histories that were directly related to my ancestry, or if we were in just the central space that is, really well known, or in some of the other locations. For example, I was able to work with this team at the Royal Albert Hall as well. It's just about being able to bring that truthful essence, regardless of whichever space. So I think it's, for me, less about reclaiming and more just about stepping in your truth, regardless of the space you're in.
Which is reclamation. And I have to say thank you all very, very much. This has been so moving. Please come back and speak to us again. We would love that.
Please come back and perform.
Perform and then speak to us, of course. And thank you, all of you, audience, and for being with us, and the ones who will be in the future for this conversation. Thank you from Hartwig and me for the Era of Reclamation, a Condrum talk, and we will be back next month. And we sign off with this beautiful video. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did they steal our voices in broad daylight? Rip us from ancient ancestral homes? Did we learn to bury words inside our skin, choosing to forget under the din of existence?
Everything you see around you was built off the backs of black and brown bodies.
I think sometimes all we want is to feel like we're part of something, so we laugh along, to fit in, to belong. Inside, pain grows from a whisper to a storm, seeking retribution and reform. But love is endless, a new dawn. Love resolves, and the future is born.
Oh Lord, age after age, you've sent your messengers to this pitiless world they claim. Remove all ill will from your heart. Oh Lord, age after age, you've sent your messengers to this pitiless world they claim. Remove all ill will from your heart.
There were times I messed up, times I was silent, when I should have said something like, "That's not okay." To laugh along at jokes with punchlines about pakis and galas. They smiled, harmless banter, bro chordo. But how could I let it go? Did I not know? The voice in my head was laughing at myself, at the color of Ma and Baba who crossed oceans to find their children hope. That voice grew louder and stronger every day, fed by the illness in my brain. And it made me do things to myself, to fit in, to belong, to accept and move on. Scars that will always remain beneath the melanin and my pain. Do you see it now? Like a virus, crawling in the minds of oppressors and bullies, in the silence of the apathetic, in the hearts of those who learn to cope by laughing along with a joke till a white knee is pressed down on a black neck. Then cities burn and fires rise and the whole world screams, "I can't breathe."
Forgive and love, forgive and love, forgive and love, forgive and love, forgive and love. Have I not heard the silenced voice of justice, weeping in solitude at might? Have I not seen in what agony reckless youth shatters its life? Have I not seen secret malignance strike down the helpless under the cover of night? Choked is my voice, mute are my songs darkly. My world lies imprisoned in a dream. Choked is my voice, mute are my songs darkly. My world lies imprisoned in a dream. Choked is my voice, mute are my songs darkly. My world lies imprisoned in a dream.
Forgive and
Choked is my voice,
forgive and love.
are my songs darkly. My world
Forgive
lies
and
imprisoned
forgive
in a
and
dream.
love.
Imprisoned in a dream.
Forgive and love. Forgive and love. Forgive and love. Forgive and love.
Imprisoned in a dream.
Forgive and love. Forgive and love. Forgive and love. Forgive and
Imagine your favorite space in the world. It could be a building, a venue, or a pub.
Where voices come together, where music echoes and life just burns bright. A place which has lived through generations, which has seen us grow.
Now imagine those spaces fall quiet, shuttered, and lifeless.
In the shadow of a pandemic. What could it look like for us to re-enter again? To reclaim these spaces
and break their silence.
In the Great Court, you can feel just really grand. It feels even more grand right now because the space is empty, because it's silent. It makes you feel like you're part of something a lot bigger.
This space is silent because it's lacking movement at this moment. Mine is a new voice that's not necessarily verbal, but that's physical. So I'm adding to the cohort of voices, the lived history, the lived shared histories that exist within this building.
Oh, Lord, age after age, you've sent your message.
There is a really interesting relationship with power in this building, and that comes from there being conflicting narratives and perspectives of how history took place.
Of course, this group performing in this space, a space which has traditionally marginalized ethnic minority opinions, that's a statement in and of itself, as it should be. And I wanted to show that the world's power dynamics need to be rethought and maybe even turned on their head.
Yet on this evil day, I've turned them away with...
This song, called Messengers, was born out of a personal response to the Black Lives Matter movement, especially after the killing of George Floyd. And it dawned on me that there was space for South Asians to stand in solidarity with the Black community.
To accept and move on, scars that will always remain beneath the melanin and my pain. Do you see it now? Like a virus crawling in the minds of oppressors and bullies, in the silence of the apathetic, in the hearts of those who learn to cope by laughing along with a joke till a white knee is pressed down on a black neck. Then cities burn and fires rise and the whole world screams, I can't breathe.
Forgive and love, forgive and love.
We want to try and reauthor this vast space with our bodies and our voices. We want to question how to occupy the bridge between rage and beauty, and what's the cost of forgiveness. And in many ways, the chorus is a question, forgive and love, question mark.
So when I think of forgiveness and love, it's really important to acknowledge that our perspectives and our experiences may be overwhelming to some people, but there's never a time that's too late to make that change, and there's never a time that's too late to act upon that urgency that you felt in the summer of 2020.
I'm breaking a silence of listening. There is a need for others to be silent and to hear the voices of people who are always speaking, and they're always speaking loudly, proudly, clearly, but they're not being heard.